My name is Terry Moir, and I am the program director at Channel 3. For many years, I was on the radio with my friend Trapper Jack. But more importantly than either of those things, I am now the mother of 2 driving teenagers. One is 19, one is 16. He just started driving. Before we get started, let me introduce our 2 panelists tonight. This is, in fact, Scott Robertson. He is the HR director and the teen instructor at Drive Team. And I'm happy to tell you that my daughter went through the Solon High School Driver's Ed program, and then I enrolled her at Drive Team because I really felt she needed the backup. And this is Anne-Marie Hayes. Anne-Marie is the president of Teens Learn to Drive Foundation and a board member on the National Organizations for Youth Safety. These 2 people have so much information to give you tonight. But one of the things that we found out as we were putting the program together is that research shows that teen drivers whose parents are highly involved in the supervised driving process are 50% less likely to crash a car. They are 71% less likely to drive intoxicated. They are 2 times more likely to wear a seatbelt, and they are 30% less likely to use a cell phone. Would each of you like to maybe start with a statement that you'd like to give parents, sort of set the table for tonight?
Sure, Terry. Or Ann, I'll start with Terry.
I want to tell you a little bit about how I got into this, because if anybody had told me 5 years ago that I would be a driving instructor and talking to parents about safe teen driving, I wouldn't have believed it. About 4 years ago, I was having a glass of wine with a friend of mine who's an actuary. And we were talking, and I said to her in the course of the conversation, so what's my life expectancy now? As kind of a joke. And she said, well, around 94, 95. And I have to say that really shocked me. And I said to her, well, gee, I'm sure the number I heard was more like 78 or 80 for women. And she said, well, that's true if you look at everybody from birth. But once you get past 30, it jumps way up. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, there are lots of different reasons, but the biggest reason is because so many teens and young adults make bad decisions and have risky behaviors and they die too soon. My daughter was 13 at the time, and that scared the heck out of me. And so being a corporate trainer, a former teacher, and part of the Oprah generation, I started working on a resource for her about everything I thought might impact her. I looked at eating disorders, I looked at alcohol, drugs, everything. And when I worked on a story for her about teens and driving, everything changed. I have one beautiful daughter who I adore. And I came to realize that if I lose her as a young adult or as a teenager, it will almost certainly be in a car. I had heard the statistics before, but somehow that's when they really came home. And so everything changed for me, and this is what I've been doing ever since.
I come from a little bit different background than Ann does. Unfortunately for me, I was a law enforcement officer for nearly 25 years. I saw the tragedy that comes along with teen driving. I've stopped those teens driving over 100 on the interstate before. A 3 to 5 second event that takes place in their lives can change their life, your life, a community's life. And that 3 to 5 seconds is a crash. That's all they last. I welcome you tonight. I hope you take something away with you tonight. If you have any questions, please ask, and we're going to be more than happy to answer them for you.
Let me start off by asking you, Scott, the whole thing at 15 and a half years old, we are putting children into cars, and for the most part, they're all going through driver training programs. Do you feel the driver training programs that are in place in the state of Ohio right now are the right way to go? I mean, are these kids getting enough training before we actually hand them a driver's license at 16?
And I'm going to have to say, yes, Drive Team, yes. There's other schools within the state of Ohio that, because of the state requirements, the state only requires that they get 50 hours of training. They get 8 hours of an in-car session before they can get their driver's license. We at Drive Team require that, excuse me, they get 12 hours of in-car sessions with an instructor. That's 2 6-hour sessions, as well as they have to drive 100 hours before we'll give them an exit certificate to go get their driver's license. So, is it enough? No, Terry, it is not. In my opinion, it's not. I think the state needs to be more strict with new drivers. They've lowered the age of what a teen now can get a learner's permit. It went from 16 down to 15 and a half. I think they need to be more strict with it.
And Anne-Marie, from your experience, I mean, you're really immersed in this now. How do you feel about the idea that we're putting 15-and-a-half-year-olds into cars and assuming that after that 8 or 12 hours of, even with 12 hours of instruction, is that enough for them to be safe on the road?
It's definitely not enough. 8 hours, I'm also a certified driving instructor now. 8 to 10 hours of behind the wheel experience with an instructor is a good starting point. It will give them some basic skills. But really, parents are the key to helping them practice those skills and hone those skills. And the majority of government groups believe 100 hours is really what they need of practice to begin to develop reflexive skills. And reflexive skills are the skills that take over when a box falls off the truck in front of them, or when something happens and they need to decide where to go on the road to avoid it. And that's really where you want to get your teens to.
You know, I had not heard of this before I got involved with this program, but I have also absolutely fallen in love with this, which is a teen driving contract. And I think this is the smartest thing, and I don't know how. I mean, I've got 2 in cars now, and I had never really heard about this until you were talking about it the other day. What is the teen driving contract, and why do you think it's so valuable for a family?
And this is something you cover in your book.
I have actually several contracts. One is a novice level parent-teen contract, because then the teen is driving with a co-driver. With a restrictive license, then you want to include what the restrictions are. And then when they're off on their own driving by themselves, there are other things that you want to introduce. Some of the things that parents never think about are things like, what happens if somebody says, toss me your keys, and I'm just going to go pick up a pizza. Hard for a teen to say no when somebody says that. It sounds fairly innocent. But if there is a collision, are you covered for it by your insurance? Probably not. The repercussions can be enormous. So agreements help parents really talk with their youth about situations that you might not think of right off the bat. They also help define what the rules are, because one of the worst things to hear is, I thought you meant. You really want them to understand what the rule is and what the repercussions are if they don't follow the rule. And then, of course, you must enforce them. If they're going to lose their license for 3 weeks, if there's an infraction, then you must follow up with that and make sure they lose it immediately. The other thing that I think a contract should have is what I call a safe passage clause. And a safe passage clause is something like, if you are ever in a position where you need a safe ride home, I don't care where you are, I don't care what the circumstances are, call me and I will come and get you. I would rather come across town at 3 o'clock in the morning to pick you up than identify your body in the morgue the next day. Please call me. I won't yell at you. We'll deal with it the next day when we're all calm and can deal with it in a kind of civilized manner. But please call me.
And how do you feel about driving contracts?
And Terry, I have to agree with that. In my profession, we saw, at least I saw, a lot of parents that were in absolute denial when we had a problem with their child. And they didn't want to enforce those consequences of either a contract or an agreement. All parents of teens have to stick by what they're told. If they say they're going to lose their license for 3 weeks or 2 months or whatever it be for a speeding violation or a curfew violation or whatever it might be, those parents have to step up to the plate, not be that teen's best friend, and do what's right. They have to send that message to that teen that the behavior won't be tolerated.
How important do both of you feel it is to, and again, guilty, because I don't think I really did this very much, but how important is it for the parent to actually know the laws in the state of Ohio? You and I talked about the law about having only one other non-familial person in the car. Are there other laws that you think parents are probably not even aware of that they're actually should be enforcing with a teenager that they're not enforcing?
Yes, and that's a good question, Terry. There are there's curfews for drivers that, they're only allowed to drive during certain times, at a certain age. But outside of that, you really need to know the communities that your teen's going to be driving in, because the city I worked in was a lot more strict about curfew. Our curfew for a 15-year-old started at 10 o'clock, unlike the state of Ohio laws that start at midnight. So you really have to know the communities your teen's going to be driving in or that you live in. Can they be out past that time? Do they have permission to be out past that time? If they're working for an employee, they have to have a letter from their employer saying that they're supposed to be at work and they're allowed to be out at that time. The problem is that these are all secondary offenses. It's not a primary offense that a child can be stopped for. There has to be some other type of violation involved before they can stop that teen. And I told Terry the other day, I'll find something to stop your teen for if I have to. And I hate to admit that, but whether it's weaving, a lane change, a blinker, a light, I'll find something to stop that teen if I want them bad enough.
I would recommend that you take it a little bit further. I mean, where graduated driver licensing came from, it's not to punish teens. That's not what it's about. What they did was take all the statistics of crashes over the last years and looked at how many teens die and are really badly injured every year. They looked at all of the factors that influence that crash. Darkness was one of them. High speed was one of them. Passengers was one of them. Now cell phones and other distractions are part of that. And that's really why we have those laws. I would recommend that you really take a look at what the law is and decide whether or not that's good enough for your family. Because parents have the most to lose. If your teen is in a crash, it will change your life forever. So make your own rules, set your own rules for the family, write them down and initial them so everybody understands what they are. The other thing that does is protects your teen. So if someone says, come on, you can take him on the highway, they can say, look, if that happens, I lose my license for 3 weeks or 2 months, so I can't do it. It gives them a reason to do the right thing.
And I will say, we were talking about this the other day, and I have a 16-year-old who just started driving 6 months ago. And a couple of weeks ago, he said to me, well, he wanted to take a second person in the car. And I said, you can't. It's against the law. And he goes, it's a secondary offense. And I said, yeah, well, in this family, it's a primary offense. You take one person or you don't take the car. There's your choice. But I do think there's a tremendous amount of pressure for kids because some parents are tough, like I am about that particular thing, because I think more than one kid in a car is a real distraction. And so I am really tough about that. But what do you say when it's, Bobby's mom? Bobby takes 6 people in the car with him. Right. And it's only a 4-seat car. So, as parents, how do you handle that?
You know what, and I'm going to back up just for a second, Terry. One of the things I want to remind everybody is we all know that whatever you read on the internet is true, right? I brought an article to a meeting we had Friday. And I won't say what websites because it's a very well-known website. And on that website, they had wrong information about the laws in the state of Ohio. So be very careful. Go to a credible site. Use your teen magazine's website to look up the information. Sorry.
No, I just think, again, and Emery, maybe that's the one that you can handle, because I do think there's tremendous pressure for kids. And I think, in turn, that puts tremendous pressure on parents. Because if everybody's not on the same page and different families have different laws, I just think that makes it more difficult for you as a parent to handle that. Do you have any advice for parents about that issue?
Well, parenting is never easy, and it's not about being easy. But I think it's really important not to sacrifice convenience for safety. And it's the same thing my mother said to me. Johnny may do it, Billy may do it, you're not doing it. And that's really where parents need to draw the line. You make your own decisions.
I was going to say, how do you feel about, so a lot of these parents have 15-year-olds, 15-and-a-half-year-olds who are getting ready. How important is it for them to really know the car that they're going to be driving?
I think that's a tremendous thing for kids to learn. They need to learn what the gauges mean. We get teens in our program that don't even know what the brake and the gas are. So they need to learn everything, how the wipers turn on. I can't tell you the number of kids that we have to go, because they have to run with their headlights on. I'll bet at least 50% don't even know how to turn the lights on in the car. So they need to be taught everything that goes on in that car, except the radio.
Well, we talked about, that's a great point. And the three of us were talking before we came up here tonight about the whole question of cell phones. I was very proud of the fact that the 2 cars I've most recently purchased have hands-free, because I've said to my kids, if I ever catch you with a cell phone in your hand in a car, you're not driving it anymore. So I was very proud of myself until Anne-Marie said to me, oh, really? Because in my house, you're not allowed to have even hands-free in the car. How do you both feel about the idea of kids? I mean, cell phones are a part of their lives. I mean, I think they don't know what life was like before the cell phone. And so are there things that, how do you feel about hands-free? And really, truly, how do you feel about the concept of technology and how it's changed the way our kids are learning to drive versus the way we all learn to drive?
And I'll let you go.
Talking on a cell phone, having a conversation on a cell phone is a cognitive distraction. The only difference is with the handheld one is that, you have a hand off the wheel. Other than that, it's the same distraction. Human brains cannot concentrate on 2 things at the same time. We think we can. But I interviewed Dr. David Strayer, who is an expert. This is what he does. He's out of the University of Utah. And I said to him, but if you're driving using hands-free, isn't it the same as having a passenger in the car and you're just chatting with them? And he said, no, Anne-Marie, it is not. Because if you're talking to a person in the car, and you pull up to an intersection, there is another set of eyes on the road. They're scanning the intersection with you. They'll warn you if there's somebody there. They stop talking. When you get through the intersection, they start talking again. When you're talking on a cell phone, that person at the other end has no idea where you are. They keep talking, you keep listening. And I have also personally noticed that people don't turn their heads. They're not scanning while they keep their head focused on the voice. And that's not a safe way to drive.
One of the things I talked about with that is people that are involved in some type of either heated discussion, they're involved with some type of argument on the phone, they're not focused on the road. They're focused on winning that battle. Just like Ann said, they're driving, they're staring, they're looking, they're arguing, or someone has gotten some bad news over the telephone, they're talking on the phone. It can be a very distractful situation when you're trying to operate a 1 or 2 ton vehicle.
How about, are there things being developed now where technology can actually help us as parents?
Yes, there are. There's several devices out there that either through a smartphone, stuff that's being plugged into an ECM that can text you when the vehicle goes over the speed limit, can text you if when the car's shut off. It can shut down the texting capabilities. It can limit who is called on that vehicle or through the cell phone. So there's a variety of things that can be done. The smartphone applications, there's a monthly fee to those. What plugs into the ECM? It's expensive, but what are our teens worth?
Yeah, but if they texted me and said your child is going over the speed limit, my first inclination would be to call them and go, slow down, which I think would in fact defeat the purpose.
But again, we get back to the driving contract.
Right.
I know you were doing this. Here's the data. Give me the keys, give me the driver's license. You're done for this amount of time. So yes, there's a lot of technology, and it's up and coming to get better. But there's stuff out there now that's available that you can use as parents to monitor what your children are doing in that 1 or 2 ton vehicle.
What are the laws in terms of, say you get a child under 17 either gets caught with more than, and again, I realize they got stopped for some primary offense, but they get caught with more than one person, and non-familial person in the car, or they get a speeding ticket in the first 6 months, or are there repercussions that the law is going to put on them?
Well, again, when you look at the offenses now that are made for specific teen drivers, those are all misdemeanor offenses. So the court has the capabilities of suspending a license forever, however long they want to. Speeding violations, normally, you're looking at probably a 1 to 2 months suspension, depending on what the speed is. Is it a school zone? You know, did I stop that teen going 100 in a 65 zone? So it really breaks down to what it is.
Excellent, because I told my son they'll take his license away till he's 18. I made up my own laws. I think that we all grew up and learned to drive in a different time, in sort of a different era, and none of us, or at least I didn't know a lot of kids when I was growing up who had their own car, or if they did, it was, you know, their mom's old car or whatever. And I think nowadays there are so many kids whose parents are lucky enough to be able to afford to put them into a car of their own. And from a parent's standpoint, it's really convenient to put them into a car because suddenly they can drive themselves or they can drive their little sister. But again, I think when you think about the fact that you're putting these children of whom you only have a few into a car, it is a very frightening and sobering thought. And I think, do you feel like parents really think about this enough before they actually put their kids into a car?
Well, and I'll share a story with you of what I told Terry and Sue and Stephanie the other day. We had a parent call in, and their main focus for our school was, how fast can you get my daughter through your program, because I need her to pick up her young sibling from school. That was their focus. Now, do you really want a brand new 16-year-old driver putting her sister in the car with her and lose 2 siblings at one time in case of a tragedy?
A lot of people sacrifice convenience for safety. And it's just, or safety for convenience, and it's really not worth it. I mean, I know it's a pain in the neck, and I only have one. But for people with 3 or 4 or 5 kids, I mean, it's a job shuffling them from place to place. And we look forward to that time when we don't have to be the taxi, we can hang up the keys. But for a little bit longer, while they're novice drivers, it's worth the effort. I can't tell you how many parents I've spoken to that wish they could take something back. You know, novice drivers, they're inexperienced, and every crash has it. I thought before I got into this that there were hellions out there somewhere who were tearing up the roads, and they're the ones who were getting involved in the crashes. And that is not the case. There are some of those, but the majority of kids who get involved in crashes are good, responsible kids who make a mistake. And this learning process, this training process, is to avoid those mistakes.
How important do you guys think it is for, say, parents of a group of teens to maybe even get together ahead of this whole process and say, let's come, you know, not only just a family contract, let's come up with a friends contract. In other words, we are all going to say you're not allowed to drive with more than one person. We're all going to say, you know, you're not allowed to be out past midnight. How important do you think it is that friends, parents of friends, all get on the same page?
I think that if you can rally your community and talk to their friends, that's an ideal place to be. But a lot of people have a hard time talking to the parents of other teens. I will tell you, though, that more than 50% of the teens who die in crashes are passengers. So it's certainly in your best interest to have those conversations if you can.
I'll tell you, as parents, don't be afraid to talk to another parent about a teen. And a real quick story, this happened to me just a few weeks ago. My daughter does competitive cheerleading. We're going down the road to the cheerleading gym, and here comes a car. I knew it was one of the tumbling coaches, 17 years old. Here's a 15-year-old. He had just turned 15 2 days prior to that, driving his car. I don't play well with that, because you're out there, I'm out there, and here's a 15-year-old driving a car. As Ann said, if he crashes that car, he has no insurance. So I had a little chat with the tumbling coach, and then I had a heart-to-heart with him when he came back. So I told another parent, his parent called his grandmother, who in return called the tumbling coach's father. So it really delivered the message that I was trying to get to him. You know, be very careful because we're all watching.
Well, and I think, you know, what kind of responsibility do you think as parents that we have to be a good example? I mean, we've all been driving for 20 or 30 years, and I think we all feel like we know the road and we know the cars. And I mean, and who among us has not gone 45 into 35, or who among us has not, you know, maybe not pumped those brakes as hard as we needed to at a stop sign? Do you feel, especially as your kids are getting into that driving age, 12, 13, 14, 15, where they're cognizant, that two things: one, you should be almost talking to them while you're going through it, and two, you should really, for lack of a better word, put the brakes on yourself and your own driving habit? I mean, really use it as a remedial for yourself?
I have a 9-year-old daughter. We play games when we're in the car. And it's probably because I was in the profession I was in. But a lot of times we'll play a game. Who doesn't use their signal? Who's weaving? And my daughter will get up beside them, they're on their cell phone. Who made an improper turn? Who's speeding? Get involved with your child. Talk to them 2-3 years before they're going to get that license. Start talking to them. Start playing the car games. Make them realize what's out there. What's their responsibility?
And don't underestimate, I mean, they're watching you from a very early age. It's, they're always watching. So once they get their license, you will find that they do exactly what you did. If you tell them not to use the cell phone, and there's a new study out now that teens say 90% of their parents say, do as I say, not as I do. You got to put the cell phone away. For me, that's an easy one because I've never been a person who has to have that constant contact. But for me, the harder choice is, like, I have to admit, I've driven when I've had a glass or two of wine, and I don't want my daughter to do that. So what I decided I had to do was be a better role model, and I had to make sure she saw me as a better role model. So I started, every time we go out, my husband or I'll have the conversation in front of my daughter, okay, who's the designated driver tonight? And we talk about it. Whoever is doesn't drink, and no alcohol. And then one day, NBC had a television show on. It was called What Would Your Teen Do, or What Would Your Child Do? And one of the scenarios was a school, and the teacher gave a student was sitting there that the other kids didn't know. There were 4 of them all together. And this kid already told them he'd been drinking. The teacher came up and said, okay, here, Joe, you drive them. Now, these girls already knew this fellow had been driving, and the question was, would they get in the car, even though they'd been told not to? And sure enough, they did. So that's a great talking moment with my daughter. So I'm talking to her about this. And I said, Emily, I don't want you ever getting in the car with anyone who's driving. Even if another parent comes to pick you up, don't get in the car. In fact, if I come to get you and I've been drinking, don't get in the car with me. And she rolled her eyes, which would normally drive me crazy. And she said, Mom, that would never happen. If you have 1 glass of wine, you say, I can't drive. I've been drinking wine. But that's what I want her to hear, and that's what I want her to emulate. And it's hard to set yourself up as a role model.
Well, and actually related to that, when we all learned to drive, and Scott, this is probably more, you're a driving instructor too. It was always 9 and 3, 9 and 3. Now, my kids came home and said, Mom,
10 and 2. It was
10
10
and 2.
2.
My kids, no, Mom, it's 4 and 8. I was like, 4 and 8? And as a parent teaching him to drive, I was like, how do you drive at 4 and 8? And so I went through the team drive. I went through team drive because I got a little concerned that as a parent, I was going to be giving out bad information. So I actually enrolled my daughter, but I actually enrolled myself. I went through that 4-hour course that you have.
Winter skills?
Winter skills. I went through the winter skills course. But part of the reason I went through it was to try and learn to drive at 4 and 8, which really takes a shift in your mind more than anything else.
Correct.
Where is the whole mindset of 4 and 8? And where did that come about? And how much do you think? Because I think when we're driving, we're used to doing the hand. They don't do that. They do the shuffle. They teach the kids the shuffle.
The theory is that 8 and 4, 9 and 3 keeps you away from the airbag. The theory is that if you're turning your car, your hands are crossed across that steering wheel, you have a frontal impact, the airbag goes off at 200 miles per hour, it's going to throw your arm back into your facial area. That's the theory.
But practically, that's not really what often happens. But I will say that in Ontario, we do 9 and 3, and we do hand over hand because it gives you better control on the steering wheel.
Now, we teach shuffle steer, okay, to try to keep, but I'm going to tell you, even when I'm teaching teens, I drive hand over hand when I leave there. It's very hard to break that habit and learn to shuffle steer.
Is the shuffle steer that you're never taking your hands off the wheel?
Correct.
Well, but you do to move a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's a push-pull
That's the theory, though,
action.
is that you're not,
That's the
you
theory.
don't,
Push-pull.
Yeah, push-pull.
you don't take your hands off
Yeah.
the wheel. If any of you have not been in a car recently and you try and do this, it's a really, you have to really think
Yes.
about moving that steering wheel if you're never going to take your hands off that steering wheel.
But just think of how difficult it is to change something you know, and then you think of a novice who's never done any of it before, and how much there is for them to know. They have to be watching everywhere. They have to be accelerating, decelerating. They have to be checking their mirrors. There's so much for youth to know, and that's why it's really important for parents to get involved. That's why they really need a co-driver, and your job as a co-driver is really to watch the road with them and to coach them and support them, not just to ride shotgun.
And remember, and I know this is going to become a shock to some of you may not be the best driving instructors for your teens. We have teens tell us, my mom screams at me. Okay? If you realize that...
I told my son not to call you.
Terry, we had you figured out a long time ago. If you realize that maybe you're not the best instructor for your teen, get somebody else. Get an independent. Hire somebody. Hire a school to do it for you. But don't put them in a position where they're getting screamed at by you, which is making them nervous and putting them at risk and you at risk and somebody else at risk.
Okay, we have some questions. The first one is, what should I do for the first time I take my child to a parking lot to drive?
I think before you even get in the car, you need to be talking about the parts of the car. You need to circle check the car, which you're looking for, to make sure that everything's working, as you mentioned earlier, that the lights are working, that the signals are working, that they know where everything is on the car. Then when you get into the vehicle, you want to make sure they're in the right position. So they want to set their seat properly. They want to be 10 to 12 inches back from the steering wheel. They need to adjust their mirrors, the outside mirrors. There are different ways of doing that, but for a novice driver, typically, they should adjust the mirrors on both sides so they have half sky, half ground, and they see just a sliver of the side of the vehicle. As you begin to drive, you can actually wing those mirrors out so you eliminate the blind spot more, but that's a good starting position. They want to set the rear view mirror so that they have a full view of the back window. They want the headrest to be right behind the head, and that really is what keeps you from whiplash in the event of a crash. And you want to make sure that their positioning is right. You also want to go through with them that their heel should be on the floor and that they only use one foot and swivel back and forth between the accelerator and the brake. Some kids will want to say, well, can't I use my left foot? And the answer is absolutely no. You always use your right foot. And then you go through the different gears. And then you can teach them how to turn on the ignition. Then you want to start them very slowly and practice starting and stopping. You want nice smooth starts, nice gentle stops. And from there you go into emergency braking, never at a high speed, but so that they know the feeling when they stomp on the brake. Sometimes, especially with ABS, they might hear a grinding noise. They have to make sure that they'll be able to hold that brake and they keep their eyes up. I really could go on about this for a long time. You want to make sure with youth, and this is a difficult thing, especially for this generation, is that their eyes are up and they're looking as far ahead as possible, and that's like 14 to 15 seconds down the road. That's where they will spot the hazards before they get up to them, so they have time to react.
If you're going to use a parking lot, parking lots are a great place for teens to learn how to drive, because there's stop signs, there's crossbars for them to stop. Just one thing I caution you about, don't get your teen in the habit of driving across the parking spaces, because if they do that after they get their driver's license, I used to handle so many accidents. Someone's cutting across those, those spots, and boom, they get hit. It's their fault. Use that parking lot as your advantage. Go up and down the aisles. I would recommend to do it when the lot's empty. Don't do it when, because parking lots can be a very hazardous place, during shopping time.
What about backup mirrors? A lot of cars now have backup mirrors and backup cameras as well. Do you think kids should be taught to depend on those, or? I know somebody who actually covered the backup camera in their car so their teenager would not be able to use it.
If they come to our school, we will tell them to cover that up, because we don't want them to use that as a judge when backing a vehicle up. We want them to be able to use their mirrors. Learn to use your mirrors. Learn to use your side mirrors. If you have to, and you have to turn your head a little bit to see, but not to use a backup camera.
Okay, how do you?
I'd agree with that.
Okay, how do you feel about just completing the required hours that the state of Ohio is asking, or are there other criteria that you both feel should be doing? I mean, should you be this person asked, should you be going out on the highway? Should we take them out in rural areas? Should you, as the parent doing the 50 hours, should you be stretching that amount of time?
That is a great question. Practice must be structured, and you have to cover all kinds of weather, all kinds of road conditions. More crashes, more deadly crashes happen on rural roads than on city roads. I mean, there are more crashes on city roads, but most of those are fender benders. In rural areas, that's really where the deadly crashes happen, partly because you drive at a higher speed, there are animals, there are soft shoulders. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons. So you need to practice on rural roads as well as city roads. You need to practice on neighborhood roads as well as big intersections. And you gradually increase the levels of difficulty as they begin to learn to drive. One of the most dangerous maneuvers on the road is the left-hand turn. And you need to practice those again and again. It's very difficult for youth to judge how quickly oncoming traffic is coming, and so that requires a lot of practice. And
one thing in the state of Ohio, parents, the state of Ohio does not require that your teen be given any highway time. They have to have highway time. They have to learn to be able to drive on a highway. If you're investing in a driving school, make sure that school is going to teach your child how to drive on the interstate. Just like Anne Marie said, it has to be gradual. Start in your neighborhood. Gradually work your way up to that rural road, then get into the city, then get into the highway. But teach every element of what your teen needs to learn.
also, all weather. Don't cancel the lesson because it's raining out today. I mean, once they've had a lesson or two, then it's really important. If there's rain or snow, you want to make sure that you're there the first time that they experience it, so you're able to help them and you're that extra set of eyes.
Okay, here's another really good question. Is it realistic to think that a teenager will speak up if they don't really feel safe in a car?
I think, again, that comes down to parenting and teaching your child that it's okay to speak up and say, you know what, you're frightening me. You need to stop and let me out. I remember doing it once when I was young. Guy lived next door. I remember going down a 4-lane street. He was flying, and I told him, stop and let me out, because I was scared to death. Now, yeah, I had to walk to the payphone. Yeah, we didn't have cell phones back then. But yes, your child has to be told, and they need to understand it's nothing embarrassing to speak up and speak your mind and be told tell another teen, you need to let me out.
I think it's really important to encourage youth to speak up and to, when they do, to pat them on the back and say, I'm really proud of you, and give them that positive reinforcement. It is a very hard thing to do, but really encourage them and talk to them about it and give them what ifs. If this happens, then how are you going to handle it, and talk it through. And that makes it easier too if they've already been through it with you and they have an action plan of how to deal with it.
That's a good one. What is the best way to determine if it is safe for your children to drive with friends? And I would say driving, I would ask that both ways. Them driving friends or them riding with other friends. I mean, I think both experiences are scary, because in my mind, once your child starts driving with a friend in the car, your child's now responsible for that child. And vice versa. Your child climbs into a car with another teen who's only been driving for 2 or 3 months. Your child's now at risk. You know, how much time has that child really had in the car?
I would ask, and I do, I ask a lot of questions. How long have you been driving? Where are you going? What route are you taking? And I remind them that this is a big responsibility, that I'm trusting them to bring my daughter home safely. And I know it's embarrassing for her, and I'm okay with embarrassing her for a few years.
Anything?
I agree with that 100%.
Okay.
You know, the questions are the biggest thing. You know, ask the questions. Once that child turns 18, yes, they are an adult, but use your resources. Use the internet to go out and do that background check. You can check court records in every county, in every community. Check to see if they've had that speeding violation or you know, some type of crash. Use the resources before you let your teen or your adult teen into another car.
If your child turns 15 and a half in the wintertime, would you suggest that they do a regular driver's ed course and then drive team, or would you put them in the drive team defensive driving class first and then let them do their driver's ed?
No, they're going to have to go through the regular teen skills program and then get into that. And I think Ann will agree with this, I don't care if it's a blizzard. We do not cancel teen weekends. If it's this much snow out in the lot, we've plowed, but it's still coming down. We're still going to have the teens out there doing the same thing if they would have done in July, because they need to learn, living in northeastern Ohio or in Toronto, Canada, the weather's could turn crappy real quick. So they need to do that. And after they learn the basic skills, then go through the winter skills program.
But personally, I believe 15 and a half is a little young. I think 16 is a better age. I think that the human brain doesn't mature until about age 25. So part of me would like my daughter to wait until 25. I mean, clearly that's not going to work. But it's not. But the problem too is that by 18 she'll be at university and she'll be away from home. So I will have very little input then. I think 16 is the best age, but 15 and a half, that 6 months makes a difference. And I think, I mean, I know that's the law but I personally think it's a little early.
Well, how important do you think it is to really know your own child? I mean, I will say, and I was not well liked for it. I did not let my daughter drive until she was 17 because I really felt she wasn't mature enough. My son, I put him in a car at 15 and a half because I felt like it was a totally different kid. I just felt like he had a better sense of it. I shared with these guys when my son got in the car and I let him drive for the very first time about 6 months. No, it would have been more than 9 months ago, 10 months ago, whatever it was. We got to the first stoplight, and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, "Mom, I hate to admit this, but I'm really a little bit scared." He said, "I'm in a killing machine." And I looked at him and I was like, "Yes!" And I said to him, "You know what? I'm really happy to hear you say that, and I hope you never forget that, because that is a very real statement." And I was shocked. I really was shocked. His sister that thought would have never even entered her mind. And so that's why I mean, and again, it was a personal decision. But, you know, her dad and I talked about it, and we just decided she's just not ready. And I think that can really be tough, because she took a lot of heat and from a lot of her friends who were like, "Well, why can't you drive?" Well, you know, because I don't have my license yet. And I think it was embarrassing. But don't you think some of it is really knowing your own kid and knowing whether, in fact, this particular child is ready for that particular. Now, I think she's a pretty good driver now. Thanks. And again, he had nothing to do with it, but I did put her in drive team because I really felt like she did the driver's ed class, but I really felt she needed the support in a way that maybe other kids didn't need that support.
And I mean, personally, I think you do have to know your own child. We have parents that bring their adult children down, you know, because they're still living underneath their roof, driving their vehicles. They're going to bring their adult child down to go through our program because they just don't know how to drive a car. So, but then again, I get teens in there that have 25, 35, 45 hours of driving time. They're pretty good drivers. Are they confident out there by themselves? Probably not. But again, you have to know your child.
I think that's absolutely true. I think some people are more prone to be distracted. Some youth have, not strictly youth, I mean certainly adults too have a need for speed. Some people are constantly running late and need to make up that time. And I think that those are all skills that you can work on with your youth as they're working toward getting that learner's permit, or what do you call it again? I forget.
Temporary permit.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And this one's a great question. If your teen's friend is going to be driving and you know there's going to be several passengers in the car, including your child, what do you tell your child, and how do you tell your teenager that he or she is just not going? I mean, you're not going to be in the car with that many kids.
I think the important thing is always to come from a place of love. It's not that you're not going because I said so. It's because I love you so much that I couldn't bear if anything happened to you. So if you really want to go, let's find a way for you to get there. But that's an unsafe situation, and I just can't risk it.
I can do that. That was a great answer, Ann. I mean, that was a great answer.
And I think some of it too is that you have to do it in a way where you acknowledge, because again, you don't want to call the other parent and go, your kid's driving with 3 kids. I mean, I don't think you can do that either. I think that is a tough one though, because your child wants to go with their friends, and I think that is a really tough one. But again, and I don't know which one of it was that you said to me the other day when we were talking about this, about the amount of money that people put into other things but don't put into making sure their child is safe on the road. And I thought it was such a powerful statement, because it is so true. We spend so much money on so many things, but when it comes down to driver's education or really making sure they know what they're doing.
That's where we want to skimp. You know, I'll pay $40 an hour for a math tutor. I'll pay $50 an hour for piano lessons. But when it comes to driving, you know, I already know how to drive, so I can kind of do that. That's where we decide to skimp. My daughter will never be a concert pianist. She hates practicing, but she'll be driving for the next 60 years. That's a really good investment to make sure that they start off safe and stay safe.
Well, does anybody have any other questions that they might like to ask based on what you've heard? Yes.
Just one quick question. I'm going to buy my daughter a car, or rent her a car, or lease her a car. What's a good, safe car to get?
I don't want to say anything because we're in a BMW dealership.
I mean, other than a BMW, you meant.
I personally, and I think I have to go with what John said, I would stick to anything that's 2001 and above, something that's obviously heavy. I'm going to do a shout out to BMW, but I like German engineering. I think that German engineering makes a beautiful car, but there's a lot of good cars out there. Look for the safety features. What kind of airbags do they have in them? Do they have the side impact airbags? Do it that way. But I would look for, a good-sized vehicle.
I would agree with that. In addition, there are a couple of really good websites. One of them is the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which is iihs.org. There are a couple of other government sites that do the crash tests. And take a look at the ratings and figure out what would be best for your youth. You don't want to go with too big a car because they're hard to maneuver. You don't want to go with too small a car because you want to make sure they're protected.
Yes?
What about the financial aspect? Like, what do you think is a good idea to have your team be responsible for? And do you feel that lets them be more serious about their
That's a great question. And we all, it's human nature, we take better care of things that we have contributed to. So, I mean, what should youth pay? Should they pay part of the insurance? I mean, it's up to you to set your family rules, but they definitely should have some skin in the game. And they should, there should be rules as far as keeping the car tidy and cleaning up the garbage and making sure that they always have at least a quarter of a tank of gas, because you don't want them running out of gas somewhere. But yeah, they should have some skin in the game.
Yes.
Now, I guess this is for the driving school. Why is it that today's driving schools don't incorporate simulators in their classroom where, like you said, you know, the kids could practice driving and a deer could come out in front of them, or they could run the wheel, they could practice on the simulator. If you're going to be a pilot, you know, you've got 500 hours behind the simulator, but we put all these kids on the road and, you know, we let them drive for 50 hours with another human being. I mean, you could simulate every condition, almost every condition out there. Why don't we do that as drivers?
And I love that question because I just was talking to someone the other day about this. I said, you know, when I went through driver's class, we're going to date ourselves here. Because not only did we simulate every type of driving scenario, but you know, I was telling someone we learned how to do a 3 on the tree, you know, and I know some people are going, what? What is that? It was a manual shift transmission. I think, in my opinion, the technology is so expensive today to try to do that. It's very hard for some driving schools to afford that luxury of having that simulator or multiple because when you and I went through, I mean, we all sat in almost like a tractor trailer type of environment where there was probably 12 simulators in that, you know, and, you know, basically we just steered to a screen. You know, it really wasn't testing much. You know, braking, using your turn signals, that was basically what they looked for.
I would agree with that, but in addition to that, first of all, the simulators that are available today are not always terrific. They're getting better, but one of the problems becomes gaming. And it becomes a game of hit the deer, or it's because that's what youth do today. I mean, they're playing games, so they can be good for hazard recognition. They do have a place, but there's also a risk when it comes to that gaming mindset.
Going through driver's ed was told not to avoid a pothole, to drive through it. And I just have a hard time with that you should not, you should drive through the pothole.
I'm going to refer this to Ann because she is an in-car instructor. I'll give you my opinion after.
I think it really depends on the circumstances. If it's a big pit, it's going to be to do damage to the car and they could lose control. If they're swerving into the other lane to avoid the pothole, then that's a problem too. So I think it really depends on the circumstances.
So it's a matter of teaching them just what you said, to be aware of the surroundings. If it's an open road, no one's coming the other way.
You know, we talk about safety equipment in the car. The biggest safety equipment in any car is the brain of the driver. So everything is always, if this is the case, then do that. If this is the case, do that. And it's really thinking through what's appropriate in this circumstance. I don't think there's a yes or no answer there.
Thank you.
And please remember that car will only do what you tell it to do or what that team tells it to do. You know, it's not going to recognize that pothole. It's not going to recognize that, you know, there's somebody that's directly behind you. So if they slam on their brakes to avoid that pothole, you know, they may cause more damage to that car or injury. So they really have to be cognizant of their surroundings.
Any other questions? You know what? Before they leave, I would like, since you're addressing lots of people who are going to put teens on the road, would you each like to give them a takeaway?
I would say please share what you've learned with your friends and neighborhoods and the people that your youth, the parents of the youth that your teen will be driving with. Because as I mentioned earlier, like more than 50% of the youth who die in crashes are passengers in vehicles. It's really important that you are also very cognizant of who your youth are driving with.
I want each and every one of you to leave tonight and make it your mission to pass your knowledge on to another parent that wasn't here tonight, so they can pass it on to another parent. So maybe we can save a teen the close to 32,000 teens that have been killed in the last 10 years in fatal car crashes. We want to save them.
And I would say make sure you take a copy of the Your Teen magazine that's sitting on your seat, The Driving Issue. It's a great, great issue. Please help me thank Scott Robertson and Anne Marie Hayes for what's been great information. Absolutely great.